Before I start, I wanna say something about this, especially this because today what we're going to talk about. If you thought yesterday was provocative, today's more provocative. And so I just want to make sure you understand the page that I am on with this. This is not a political issue for me. This isn't a right-left issue for me. It isn't a Republican thing. It isn't a Democrat thing. I'm a conservative. Have been all my adult life. Um, this is a biblical that I believe that the Bible tells us that we are to care for those in need. Take care of the widow, the alien, the poor, right? Treat others as better than yourselves. And so this is a biblical issue, which is why we're covering it in Bible class. It's not a political issue, and I don't want this to become okay. So I have a provocative question for you. And you don't have to answer it. You just, if you want to raise your hand, you just kind of go like this, or whatever. But how many of you think that there is no such thing as white privilege? Maybe you're afraid to raise your hand, but that's fine. So I used to believe that white privilege did not exist. I now believe not only that it exists, but that I am privileged beyond even white privilege. And if we have time, I may get to that. Here's Webster's definition. This isn't some lefty website definition. This is Webster's definition of white privilege. The set of social and economic advantages that white people have by virtue of their race. So I'm going to start talking about this by reading to you another one of Stan Parker's posts. And oh, there we go. So remember, Stan is my friend that it wrote Facebook posts, and he invited his white friends to ask whatever questions they had, and he would answer them um, as their trusted black voice. So it says this: a safe place to talk about race with grace. Question number 5 from my white brothers and sisters: do you believe white privilege exists? My opinion as your trusted black voice. After being on staff with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes in Omaha, Nebraska for 6 years, I felt like God was leading me to transition to serving him on a staff at a church. I had no idea which church or when, but the direction I was to head was clear. After catching wind of my interest to transition, I was approached by the youth pastor of a very large, respected, predominantly white evangelical church in Omaha. He asked me to consider serving on his team to launch their first college ministry. Confirmation, or so I thought. Step 1, meet the senior pastor. The meeting was positive. I asked him about timing, and he told me he saw it happening more on the sooner side than the later. For the next step, he wanted me to meet with a group of about 5 men, influencers in the church, a couple of them elders, for an unofficial meeting. The meeting felt fine, very casual. Of course, plenty of questions directed my way, but most of the group seemed warm to me. Though I do remember not being able to get one of the men to smile, which is always one of my personal goals in life. This meeting was followed by lunch with the senior pastor. As the conversation began, he asked me a question that was posed, a question that exposed. He wanted to get my thoughts on how I would answer this conjecture, this question, that came out of the group of men I had met with. Stan is black, and his wife is white. So if we bring Stan on staff, what if other black men start coming to our church and they want to date our white daughters? Shock, disorientation, blindside. My words stumbled. I stammered, didn't know what to say. I can't remember what I said. After finishing a flavorless lunch with awkward conversation, the assault ended. We parted cordially due to my insufficiency of being able to gather my thoughts to articulate the violation he had just wrought. I would be contacted on the next step. That contact never happened. The next step never happened. No more initiative was taken toward me. Final word, we decided to hold off and not hire for that position. Has anything similar to this ever happened to you because your skin was white? No? What a blessing. What a privilege. What are your thoughts on this? I know the true story, by the way, and I know the church, and I won't tell you.
Said, was it like the group that said that?
Yep,
first?
the group asked or said that to the pastor, and the pastor passed it along to
Well, I think it shows that we right. How long ago was that? Not that it matters.
probably early 2000s.
I mean, yeah, it's yeah. He was probably very ignorant when he said it. Like he probably had like no idea. You know, that's that. I think that shows that from that point, we had a long way to go in terms of racial justice. Uh, when I hear the word white privilege, right, I feel like I totally 100% agree that it exists, but I feel like some people have used it to, like, for example, politics. I've used it to, I don't know, as a manipulative statement. Like, I've had a friend, one of my buddies came across another white person one of my buddy was blessed, or he worked really hard and he bought a house. Okay, he's like 21, and some white person came up and told him, which is like that kind of thing bugs me a little bit. Like especially if it's another white person saying that. Like I feel like that term white privilege has been used and manipulated for a specific agenda. And I guess it's hard for me. I try to think like when I hear white privilege, think outside the scope of politics. 100%. I mean, it's the story you just told. I just don't like it when it's used. You know what I mean?
I can see that, but I can also see how your friend, is being white, worked hard, earned what he got, right? He earned what he got. But maybe those jobs he had that he worked so hard at wouldn't have been available.
Maybe. But for like just for somebody to blatantly say it's just because you're white.
Yeah, I mean,
You know what I mean?
and not knowing all the facts.
Yeah, for sure. And I totally understand like redlined communities, right? North Omaha was redlined back in the day. And that is why a lot of that's why a lot of the whole African American community, most of it is in Omaha, and their school systems are poor and all that stuff. Like we need to get more funding there, which is, I guess, also what frustrates me is the whole political agenda behind everything. Black Lives Matter, the organization, raised all this money, right, and they gave it to political campaigns instead of giving them to black communities. I guess also frustrates me, So, yeah.
Any other thoughts?
That scenario happens especially now because what happened last year and even before that, like there's still a lot of people who say those things and don't think about what they're saying and how that truly affects somebody. We don't know everybody's story. So I think we need to really consider our words. Think about saying something like that. That should be going through our heads. At all. Like if we're called to be loving, it's not really loving.
Let's talk to Leah for just a second.
Like, did he like?
Oh,
Did
yeah.
He, like,
Yeah.
he probably repented.
Yeah. And he
So-
said yes.
I mean, that's a crazy. I mean, yeah, that's a crazy. I mean, even testimony. Yeah, I don't know. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I
So how does this story of Stan's relate to white privilege?
guess because we would never experience anything
Yeah, if you go to be a youth pastor somewhere, they're not
Yeah.
going to say, well, yeah, but he's white. You know? Hopefully not. Yeah. So that's a privilege that you have, right? Probably not going to be rejected, especially at a large white evangelical church in Omaha. And be rejected, maybe rejected, but not for the color of your skin. So I have a couple of lists here that I'm going to read to you. And again, this isn't political. I want you to have an understanding because I think a lot of this, I know a lot of this, is stuff that that I wouldn't have ever thought of. I have the privilege. I'm not going to make comments on it, although at the end I might make a comment on a couple of things, but we're running short on time. I have the privilege of having a positive relationship with the police generally. So these are things that are true of white people and aren't necessarily true for people of color. I have the privilege of being favored by school authorities. I have the privilege of attending segregated schools of affluence. Yes, you do. That's where you are. I have the privilege of learning about my race in school, and there's a slide on here that says, white privilege is your history being part of the core curriculum and mine being taught as an elective. And I taught ethnic studies at Northmore. And generally speaking, most schools teach white history for 1 month out of 9. I have the privilege of finding children's books that overwhelmingly represent my race. I have the privilege of soaking in media biased toward my race. I'm going to show you a picture here. This is a picture of 2 different young men who shot people and killed people. The first is white, the second is black. The headline for the white young man is theater shooting suspect was a brilliant science student. And he's in a suit and tie. The black man, it says, Michael Brown struggled with officer before shooting. The picture is not nearly so flattering. And then we have these 2 groups of young men. One group is white, one group is black. And they committed the exact same crime. In fact, the headlines are almost identical. 3 University of Iowa wrestlers arrested, burglary charges pending. Coralville police arrest 4 in burglary investigation. And the wrestlers are in their official wrestling pictures. They had mugshots. They didn't put the mugshots in. But they did put the mugshots in the Blackbird. Now, was that intentional? Maybe not, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not white privilege because we can do it without even meaning to, right? Even if it's not intentional. I have the privilege of escaping violent stereotypes associated with my race. There are these 2 students that were on the University of Missouri campus, and there was a protest. I don't know if it was a Black Lives protest or some other protest, a peaceful protest by black students. And they threatened the lives of those protesting students. And this was the comment by one person. Black students didn't like something and they went on strike. White students didn't like something and they threatened lives. And we're the violent ones. I have the privilege of playing the colorblind card, wiping the slate clean of centuries of racism. When I say I'm colorblind, I'm also blind to the history of the people. I have the privilege of being insulated from the daily toll of racism, and I have the privilege of living ignorant of the dire strait of racism today. And then here are a few more, and then I'll wrap it up. I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. These are statements of privilege. If I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing a house in an area which I can afford and in which I want to live. I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in such a location will be neutral or pleasant to me. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. I can turn on the television or open the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented. When I am told about our national heritage or about civilization, I am shown that people of my color made it what it is. I can be sure that my children will be given curricular materials that testify to the existence of their race. If I want to, I can be pretty sure of finding a publisher for this piece on white privilege. I can go into a music shop and count on finding music of my race represented, into a supermarket and find staple foods that fit with my cultural traditions, into a hairdresser's shop and find someone who can cut my hair. Whether I use checks, credit cards, or cash, I can count on my skin color not to work against the appearance of financial reliability. I can arrange to protect my children most of the time from people who might not like them. I can speak in public. I can do well in in a challenging situation without being called a credit to my race. I am never asked to speak for all people of my racial group. I can remain oblivious of the language and customs of persons of color who constitute the world's majority without feeling in my culture any penalty for such oblivion. If a traffic cop pulls me over or the IRS audits my tax return, I can be sure I haven't been singled out because of my race. I can easily buy posters, postcards, picture books, greeting cards, dolls, toys, and children's magazines featuring people of my race. So here's how I want to wrap this up. I denied white privilege for years. And it wasn't until I began trying to see the world through the eyes of someone who has been hurt by racism, through the eyes of a person of color, that I realized how privileged I am. And frankly, I'm privileged on top of privilege. Because I'm not only white, but I was raised in an affluent white home. My father was the second highest ranking military official in all of NATO. In all of NATO. There was only one guy in NATO he had to salute. And that was the chairman of the NATO Military Committee. He was the deputy chairman. We lived in beautiful houses. I had my college degree completely paid for me. Didn't pay a thing. And my dad didn't want me to have a job during school. I worked in the summers. That money ran out sometime in September, maybe October. And I always had money in my account. All I had to do is say, Daddy, I need money in my account. I am a privilege beyond privilege. And it broke me to realize how long I ignored it. I don't want to live out of my privilege. Like I deserve it or I earned it. I was just born to Danny and Marty Holiday. That's all I did to deserve it. So this is not, I told you, this is not a biblical issue or not a political issue for me. It's a biblical issue. Jesus says in Matthew 12, if you want to be great in God's kingdom, learn to be the servant of all. He says the last will be first and the first will be last in Matthew 20. And then concerning the very privileged Jewish leaders of Jerusalem, he said they do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad, which were things they wore on their forehead and arms, and their fringes long, and they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplace and being called rabbi by others. So I'm going to once again appeal to you. Please try to see issues of race from a vantage point of someone who has been hurt by racism day after day. I'm going to hand out, and I'll give it to you, so don't leave without track, people don't leave without getting. I'm gonna hand out what your project is and give time, to work on it. And I have those, that's what I want to go get.
I'm just gonna say yes.
Nope, stop. Wait, why are you not?